the company that this MCNC where I worked, they had at their largest, we had like 140 people. So it wasn't a big company. And every position I had, I was the only one in the company at the time who had done it. There had been someone maybe who had done it before, but I replaced them, so they were no longer there. So every position I had, there was no one to learn from, and there was no playbook. And some people absolutely thrive in those environments. And I think personally, I look back and I wish that, for instance, I had 3 years at an IBM where there's so much structure, right? And I say to a lot of entrepreneurs, I still think you should start your career going to work for a big company, because the amount of learning that you're going to be able to do is, you can see they've already got programs and processes and all these things, and you can see and learn how a big successful company does certain things. I said, and you'll both learn a lot of good ways to do things, and you'll probably also say, well, gosh, if I had my own company, I'd do this differently, right? But even having that is valuable because, and again, we've backed a lot of young CEOs like in their 20s. In fact, we just invested in 2 guys out of Brown who were like 23 years old. And I'm being unfair, but they don't know anything. They don't really have any experience other than going to undergrad and starting this company. So there's a lot they have to learn. There's kind of a joke in our business that we say to founders about raising money. And that is, when it comes to raising money, if you want advice, come ask for money. And if you want money, come ask for advice. So whether you're curious about getting into venture capital, or you're curious about getting into product management, or getting into, social networking or whatever, I think the way to approach those conversations is to approach somebody looking for advice and to show them that you have an interest in what they do and who they are. And a lot of people love to talk about themselves and are going to be happy to share, kind of their story and things. And a lot of people don't have time, so you have to understand that. But just developing those relationships and those questions and doing it from a standpoint, think of it as customer discovery, which is a term that we use a lot in our business. And that's really what networking is. It should be customer discovery and understanding how to ask questions that can tell you more about the subject that you're interested in. And the other thing related to that, I would say, which hopefully is somewhat obvious, ask before you leave, how can I be helpful to you? There's a guy who I've been getting to know over the last year who's in the executive program at Keenan Flagler, who reached out to me over LinkedIn. And we've had coffee probably 4 times. And he has always asked me, he's like, is there anything I can do to be helpful to you? And there's actually been a couple of things that he could do to be helpful to me. And so that's the advice I would give when it comes to networking. So when we're evaluating companies, there are 4 categories essentially that we're evaluating them on from the very first screen, and trying to maybe take them in order. The first is the company serving or attacking a market that's large enough to support a venture size outcome? So can this market support a $1 billion plus valuation company? That's the first, because if it can't, then we aren't going to look at it, because the upside's not big enough. And in venture, the only thing you know for sure is that most of the companies aren't going to work. And so the ones that work have to work in a really big way to make up for the ones that don't. So that's the first thing. The next thing is what is unique about what they're doing? Is there something unique about their technology, or is there something unique about the way they're bringing it to market? So there oftentimes is not, quite honestly, a huge difference in the technology, but in that case, what you're looking for is some unique and hopefully defensible, it's an overused term, I think, aspect of how they're bringing the company to market. So maybe they have channel partner relationships that are unique. Maybe they have supply chain relationships that are unique. So we're looking at both the technology and the business model itself. Then, okay, so if we think it passes that filter, then the next one is, and we've talked some about this, is, and it's critical, is do we think these founders have the capacity to build a really big business? Do we think they have the right things, the combination of intelligence, drive, self-awareness, and charisma to take something essentially from 0 to 50 to 100 million plus? And as I talked about earlier, that's a very unique individual, and it's really hard to know ahead of time whether that person has the capability. And then lastly, one thing that we've come to understand is very important in venture investing, and it's actually important, I think, at all stages of investing, is momentum. You cannot underestimate the power and importance of momentum. So even if you have a really interesting technology and potentially compelling founders in a market, if they don't have any momentum, it's just going to be hard to raise the money and to get things going. But if they do have momentum, and by that I mean the most obvious momentum is sales traction, right? So if they're getting customers and that, then there's something going on that you want to pay attention to. So those are the 4 things that we kind of screen. With respect to how important is team chemistry, I think I've talked a good bit about this, and I would say it's usually important. And I wouldn't just describe it as chemistry. I would describe it as, but chemistry is part of it, especially because you want the founding team to understand what their respective roles are. You can't just have 3 or 4 people who are kind of going in all different directions and they each do a little bit of everything. Ideally, you want them to have a good understanding and agreement of what their respective roles are. And one way you flush that out is you have individual conversations with them where you essentially ask them the same questions and see if you get the same answers. And you should get the same answers. Like, so what is it that you do versus what is it that Mark does? And that'll tell you a lot about whether they understand their swim lanes, so to speak. So go-to questions that we ask founders when they're presenting to us, I actually touched on them in the previous question with respect to what are the things we're looking at. And so we're going to be, as they're presenting, hopefully it's coming out in the presentation with us without us having to ask, by the way, like you should be highlighting why you're different, right? A standard pitch is, here's the problem, here's how big the problem is, here's our solution to the problem, and here's why it's unique, and here's why we're the team that can, execute on this. So again, that should all be embedded in the presentation. If it's not, I'm going to be asking questions like, okay, what is it, help me understand what it is about your software for insurance companies that's unique. I've heard 6 other companies in the last year. So, and then 2 questions that I will ask founders that almost never are addressed in their pitches, and I wouldn't expect them to be, are, okay, let's assume we fall in love with you and we wire you the money tomorrow morning. What are the first 3 critical hires that you make? And what I'm trying to understand is if they see the gaps in their capabilities the same way I do. and if they even see gaps in their capabilities. And I guarantee you, every company that we talk to has some gaps in their capabilities, because there's no way you can have a 7-person team and have the best of everything. And so that's a question I ask, because I both want to understand the degree to which they've thought through it, and I also want to understand the degree to which they're ahead of it. And what I mean by that is, are they already talking to people who could potentially fill these roles? And are they going to be able to start quickly once they close the round? Or is it going to be like, okay, we closed the round and now we're going to start having conversations? Because especially in today's job market, it's going to take you 90 days minimum to fill a position if you're starting from scratch. In 90 days in the life of an early stage company, that's a long time. And so you're behind the 8 ball. And then the other thing I like asking people is, what is your definition of success for this venture? And you'd be surprised at the variety or the variance in the answers I get. And what I'm trying to understand there is, how big are they thinking? Because to a lot of people, success is, look, if I can build a $10 million a year business that employs, 40 people, and that's success. And that is success. And that's not success for me. I can't make money on the $10 million a year business you build. I need someone who is absolutely aiming for the moon, because as I said earlier, the only thing I know for sure is the chances are they don't get there. And so I want someone who's aiming for the moon on the chance that they get to London, and I can still make a lot of money if they get to London. The most exciting thing about working VC, I think this is an easy answer and you'd probably get it pretty consistently, is every single day and week, I am meeting with really smart, really passionate people who are doing really cool stuff. A lot of times in areas that I'm not familiar with. So I'm learning new things. And that's the great part about VC, is just you're constantly getting exposed to really interesting and just high capability people who are doing cool stuff. I would tell someone a version of advice that is commonly given to entrepreneurs, and that is, always be selling. You are always selling. If you're a venture capitalist, if you think about the 3 things I told you we spend our time doing, I'm either looking for people to invest in me, which is a form of selling. I'm trying to convince you that you should give me some of your hard-earned money to invest, and then I'm going to be able to make money for you. I'm trying to convince entrepreneurs that they should take my money, and that's a selling process too. It's a courting process. The best entrepreneurs have options. They get to choose to at least some degree, they get to choose who to take money from. And so I need to convince them. I need to be selling from the standpoint of, I need to be convincing the people that are in their network that they should even introduce me to them, so that I even learn about them. And then once I meet them, I need to be convincing them that they should take money from me. It's a form of selling. And then once I'm invested in companies and I'm working with them as an advisor, as I mentioned earlier again, I need to be convincing the board, the management team, that if I think there are certain tactical or strategic directions that make sense for the company to go, that they ought to go that way. And I have to convince these people, I have to sell them on my vision of X, Y, or Z. And so my advice to somebody as to what to do to be a successful venture capitalist is understand that you should always be selling.